Hard Times, Utilitarian Education and its Divergence from the Liberal Arts Tradition. Hard Times, Utilitarian Education and its Divergence from the Liberal Arts Tradition. Charles Dickens' 1854 novel Hard Times, adapted into the BBC miniseries in 1977, offers an important critique of Victorian utilitarianism, focusing mainly on education. This 4-hour adaptation of the classic book, while condensing the story for television, is a great adaptation of the book, portraying the dehumanizing impact of an education where facts trump all, set in an industrial English town of Coketown. Through the character of Thomas Gradgrind, who opens the series with, "Now, what I want is facts. Teach these boys and girls nothing but facts. Facts alone are wanted in life. Plant nothing else, and root out everything else." Dickens portrays the modernist educational philosophy of Victorian England, with bare knowledge and economic usefulness are more important than imagination, emotion, or moral development. This system, coming from the Industrial Revolution's emphasis on efficiency, treats students as little vessels to be filled with information, preparing them solely for the automation-type roles they believe the society called for at the time. The purpose of education in this narrative is only instrumental to produce rational, compliant workers who contribute to productivity and commerce, with no opportunity for personal or ethical growth. However, the story demonstrates the inherent failure of this approach as characters educated under it, such as Louisa and Tom Gradgrind, grow up with the lack of emotional and ethical maturity, leading to unhappiness, moral failure, and general dysfunction. In opposition, figures like Sissy Jupe, raised in the fanciful world of the circus, exhibit compassion, and perhaps more importantly, resilience, leading the watcher to infer that education, there is something that in the contrast to upbringing that impacted the end result of the children. This philosophy views the human person as mechanistic and malleable, machines to be tuned to perfection, but without a soul. This perspective echoes critiques in Christopher Dawson's The Crisis of Western Education, which argues that modern vocational pragmatism severs education from its spiritual foundations. Dawson even referenced the character Gradgrind when discussing the work of Matthew Arnold, who championed sweetness and light to remain in British schools during the 1800s, as an antidote to Victorian utilitarianism. This facts-based and narrow outlook fosters alienation, as the narrative illustrates through the tragedies of its characters, implying that suppressing emotional and imaginative faculties results in breakdown both in the personal and communal settings. In this betrayal, the true is limited to verifiable facts, the good to economic gain, and the beautiful to irrelevance, creating a warped worldview that contrasts sharply with the transcendental and spiritual role in fostering human community. When juxtaposed with the liberal arts tradition, Hard Times emerges as a cautionary tale against the erosion of classical ideals. The liberal arts, which developed in Greek antiquity and was developed through medieval and early modern periods, emphasize holistic formation aimed at virtue, wisdom, civic, and spiritual life. In antiquity, as detailed by H.I. Moreau's in A History of Education in Antiquity, education was both for the cultivation of Greek paideia, but, at least in Plato's conception, was for the good of the state. Instead of utilitarian ends, however, the comprehensive cultivation of body, mind, and soul was for free citizens, allowing them to be better city-state citizens and leaders. The Greeks incorporated the liberal arts into 7 areas: the trivium, grammar, logic, rhetoric; the quadrivium, arithmetic, geometry, music, astronomy. Heavily driven by Plato and Aristotle, this system liberated the mind for contemplation of the higher things, with Romans like Cicero embracing and adapting it for Roman governance while blending practicality with virtue. During the Middle Ages, this set of subjects was integrated with Christian theology, creating a Christian Aristotelian synthesis, as Dawson describes in The Crisis of Western Education. In universities like those in Paris and Bologna, medieval scholars combined the liberal arts with Christian theology and revealed truth during the scholastic movement, taking from the pagan classics what was useful to help point to the true, good, and beautiful. The Hibinger Institute's The Heart of Culture traces this from Greek paideia to the Middle Ages to John Henry Newman, showing tradition's role in cultural identity amid the clash of Greek philosophy and Christianity. The latter was adamant that the trend began during the Enlightenment to break the Christian Aristotelian synthesis, but argued that its disassociation was a step backwards. Michael J. Buckley's The Catholic University as Promise and Project backs this up, specifically pointing to how the Renaissance humanists worked to integrate the classical subjects with a more practical application, resulting in the realization of human potential as in Studia Humanitatis. This would be counter to the fragmentation seen in Hard Times. The differences between Hard Times and the liberal arts are as stark as they are obvious. Utilitarian fragments learning into practical facts, ignoring virtue and wonder, while the liberal arts unify knowledge for contemplation and ethical living. The what is prioritized over everything else, especially the why. The series shows the disconnect between education and its transcendent roots, and due to that, Gradgrind's system oppresses rather than liberates. Similarities exist in their stances against corruption. Dickens, through his attack on the effects of the Industrial Revolution, and the liberal arts through deviations from virtue. However, Dickens' example of a more ideal outcome of childhood, in the form of the character of Sissy, tends towards romantic individualism akin to Jean-Jacques Rousseau's Emily, which promotes natural, child-led development to preserve innate goodness against societal corruption. While Sissy was partially educated in Gradgrind School, her experience with the traveling circus and its romantic free-spiritedness seemed to inoculate her against the worst impacts of the school. Perhaps melding Dickens' view with the Catholic classical education, but so deeply in contrast to the utilitarian Bishop Daniel Flores's The Synthetic Impulse in Catholic Life describe a Christian vision that interconnects all creation, rejecting the need for utility in Dickens' antagonists and advocating for a holistic approach that listens to poets, farmers, and children for a deeper understanding. Dawson warns that neglecting transcendentals can cause cultural decline, which is exactly what Dickens shows through his character's struggles. Louisa Gradgrind marries the much older industrialist, Josiah Bounderby, not out of love or even affection, but due to purely rational reasons. She had been conditioned not to let emotions drive her actions, so she had nothing to fall back upon other than facts. Thomas Gradgrind Jr. finds himself lost in a life of dissipation instead of emotional blankness. He throws himself into moral ruin as a rebellion against his utilitarian upbringing, and shows himself to be incredibly selfish to those who love him, especially his sister. So, Dawson's focus on the transcendental stands in opposition to these two shortcomings, allowing beauty to penetrate the soul and morality to structure the life. The story of Hard Times delves into the broader implications of utilitarian education on society. In the miniseries, the dark and dirty industrial landscape of the fictional Coketown symbolizes uniformity imposed by such systems, where human relationships are measured only by the value of each other, the state, and business, and creativity is therefore deprioritized. Dickens illustrates this through Bounderby's exploitation of workers, where he uses education only as a tool for creating more workers for his factories. The liberal arts tradition offers liberation through knowledge and exposure to the beautiful. Consider the difference between the Greek conception of happiness, as described by Moreau, in discussing the value of a cultured mind and friendship of muses. Hellenistic civilization attached so much importance to these values that it could only conceive of supreme happiness as a life of the artist or a man of letters. Contrast this with the senior Gradgrind's dismissal of anything not related to facts. Civilizational priorities had almost flipped completely. Dawson had noted that the separation of theology from the main thread of education is the missing link in Western values, which relates to Dickens' analysis, in which he emphasized spiritual and moral education over mere facts. Gradgrind's insistence on facts alone are wanted in life leads to a generation ill-equipped for emotional intelligence, as seen when Louisa confronts her father. "What have you done, O father? What have you done? Where the garden that should have bloomed once in this great wilderness here." This metaphor of a barren garden underscores the novel's theme that education must cultivate the soul, not just the intellect, a principle central to the liberal arts. In Greco-Roman times, education was not merely about acquiring knowledge, but about forming character. Medieval scholars built upon this by adding to classical learning Christian virtue and theology, creating a more complete system where faith illuminated reason. As Dawson explains, the study of Christian culture is the missing link, which it is essential to supply if the tradition of Western education and Western culture is to survive. This integration prevented the kind of fragmentation that the miniseries depicts. To the elder Gradgrind's credit, when he finally is forced by his daughter to see the horrible result of his educational methods, he recognizes its weakness. After Louisa's confrontation with him and her successive breakdown, he says to her, "My dear, I have remained all night at my table pondering again and again on what has so painfully passed between us. When I consider your character, when I consider that what has been known to me for hours has been concealed by you for years, when I consider under what immediate pressure it must have been forced from you at last, I come to the conclusion that I cannot but mistrust myself." This shows Dickens' hope that the clear deficiencies in the Victorian system of education will cause a correction. Even though this book is 172 years old and the miniseries 49 years old, it remains relevant to today's educational debates, where standardized testing, raised to greater importance than holistic development, consider Common Core as the latest attempt to standardize, not so much for its attempt to standardize across the United States, but more importantly, what it's decided as important to know. The novel's warning that a fact-obsessed system produces reasoning animals rather than fully human beings reduces the student to machines. In each period of time, the conception of the human body and brain has mimicked the state of the art in the industry of the time. In Victorian England, it was the machine. Now it is a programmable computer. In both cases, the human is stripped of the transcendental reality and brought to the same level as mundane things. In conclusion, Hard Times serves as a powerful affirmation of the continued relevance of the liberal arts and a powerful warning against the downsides of utilitarian systems of education. It points to a return to education firmly rooted in tradition, with the synthesis of the classics and faith formation, which can drive cultural and personal renewal. Catholic analyses and histories, from Buckley to Flores, underscore this integration of faith, reason, and beauty as essential to countering modern ills. By expanding on these themes, the essay reveals how Dickens' critique, though set in Victorian England, echoes ongoing debates in educational philosophy, advocating for a balanced approach that honors human dignity and transcendent values. Ultimately, it's about lovingly pointing students to the true, the good, and the beautiful. Thank you.